The pine-scented breeze whispered through the tall firs of the Colorado highlands as Ivy Sinclair adjusted the straps of her backpack and pressed forward. The trail was rugged, overgrown in places, but that was part of the reason she had chosen it. She didn't want to be found. Not by colleagues, not by the press. And definitely not by the hospital board back in Chicago. Just 3 weeks ago, Ivy had been a trauma surgeon at one of the nation's top hospitals, respected, admired, and utterly burnt out. The fallout from a high-profile malpractice case, one she wasn't even at fault for, had pushed her past her breaking point. She left her scrubs behind, turned off her phone, and disappeared into the wilderness. She didn't expect to nearly die here. The strike came fast. A flash of motion near her boot, a sharp pain like fire igniting in her calf, and she was on the ground, gasping, staring at 2 bleeding puncture wounds, swelling rapidly with venom. A rattlesnake. She recognized the pattern even in her panic. Her breaths grew ragged, her limbs felt heavy already. AFIS. No cell service. No one knew she was here. Then a voice, deep and calm, cut through the mounting haze. "Don't move. I've got you." A shadow knelt beside her, broad-shouldered, sun-worn, calm in a way that shouldn't be possible. He pressed his fingers gently around the wound, muttered something under his breath, and began gathering plants from nearby. "Who are you?" she croaked. "Name's Elias," he said without looking up. "You got bit. Bad. But I've seen worse." He crushed a handful of dark leaves into a pulp and packed it onto her leg. The pain seared like acid. "I need you to stay awake. Stay with me." And somehow, as the forest spun and darkness pressed in, Ivy did. Anchored not by medicine or monitors, but by the stranger who had appeared from the trees like something summoned by fate. Elias's arms were strong but careful as he lifted Ivy from the forest floor. Her body, already trembling with venom and fear, slumped against his chest. She barely registered the movement, only the rhythm of his steps, the coarse fabric of his flannel shirt, the faint scent of wood smoke clinging to his skin. They moved uphill, winding through trees and rock, deeper into the forest, instead of toward any sign of civilization. Ivy wanted to ask where he was taking her, but her lips wouldn't cooperate. Her vision blurred, her heartbeat pounded in her ears, too loud, too fast. Finally, the trees opened up to reveal a small, weathered cabin nestled against a ridge. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney. The place looked like it belonged in another century, hand-built from timber, overgrown with moss and vine, surrounded by stacked wood and rows of drying herbs. Elias kicked the door open with his boot and carried her inside. Mober. The interior was warm, lit by a fireplace crackling low in the hearth. He laid her gently on a cot near the wall and wasted no time. From a shelf lined with old jars, he grabbed a handful of dried roots and leaves, crushing them into a stone mortar. The scent of crushed pine and bitter herbs filled the room. Ivy's leg throbbed, fire crawling up her thigh. She whimpered. Elias was already back at her side, his hands steady as he replaced the field dressing with a poultice of his own making. The heat of the herbal compress burned, but beneath it, something cooled the panic that gripped her. "You're not gonna die," he said evenly. "Not tonight." His tone wasn't soft, but it was sure. She believed him more than she had ever believed any polished doctor in a sterile ER. He brought her a cup of something steaming, dark and pungent, with a smell that made her gag. "Drink this. It'll draw out the venom and help your body fight." Ivy shook her head weakly. "It smells like a forest floor." "Good. That's where I found it." She managed to drink half before passing out. The next time she woke, the fire was lower, her body drenched in sweat. She turned her head with effort. Elias was seated at a workbench nearby, grinding something, his back to her. He looked like a ghost carved from mountain stone, silent, solitary, unmovable. When he turned and saw her watching, he stood and crossed to her side. "Zeusy, you made it through the fever," he said quietly. "That's a good sign." Her lips were dry. "Where am I?" "Far from everything," he replied. "Close to what matters." Ivy's head sank into the pillow again. Her mind spun with pain, exhaustion, and 100 unanswered questions. But somehow, she knew one thing for certain. This man, this stranger in the mountains, had just saved her life. The rain came down in sheets the next day, turning the world outside the cabin into a gray blur of falling water and wind. Ivy lay beneath thick wool blankets, her body sore, her mind fogged by pain and restless sleep. But through it all, the rhythmic sound of rain on the roof and the crackle of fire beside her created a strange kind of peace, one she hadn't known in years. Elias moved through the cabin with quiet purpose. He wasn't a man of many words, but his presence was grounding. Every few hours, he came to check her pulse, refresh her bandages, offer her sips of herbal broth. His hands were rough, calloused from years of labor, but his touch was precise, almost clinical. Ivy recognized it. "You're not just a carpenter," she murmured one afternoon as he adjusted the poultice on her leg. He glanced at her, surprised she could speak. "I never said I was." "But you move like someone trained." "Military? Medic? Army?" he said, not unkindly. "A long time ago." She nodded slowly. The pieces were coming together. The precision, the herbal knowledge, the ability to act under pressure. He hadn't just stumbled into the woods. He had chosen this exile. "I'm Ivy," she added, finally giving him more than the pain and silence. "I know," he said, pulling a small ID badge from a folded jacket. "Found this in your backpack." Her cheeks flushed. "You went through my stuff?" "I needed to know your blood type." She blinked. "You gave me a transfusion?" He gave a short nod. "Just enough to stabilize you." Ivy turned her face toward the ceiling, overwhelmed. "You saved me." "I did what had to be done." Silence fell between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt honest. That evening the storm intensified. Thunder rumbled through the mountains, and the wind howled through the gaps in the window panes. Elias lit more candles and stacked wood near the fire. Ivy watched him from her cot, her thoughts drifting. "You built all this?" she asked. "Every plank," he said, setting down a lantern. "After the fire." She didn't press. He didn't explain, but the way his jaw tightened at the word fire told her enough. Whatever had driven him here hadn't been adventure. It had been grief. Later, as the storm raged and the fire glowed low, Ivy spoke again. "Do you ever miss it? The world out there?" He stirred the embers before answering. "Sometimes, but only the parts that never belonged to me." She nodded. She understood, perhaps too well. In the stillness that followed, neither of them spoke. And yet, something unspoken passed between them. Something quieter than pain, but louder than loneliness. It was the beginning of trust. By the third day, the fever had broken, and the swelling in Ivy's leg had gone down enough for her to sit upright without dizzy spells. She wrapped herself in one of Elias's oversized flannel shirts and sat by the small window, watching mist lift slowly from the pine-covered hills. The silence of the forest no longer felt foreign. It felt like something she had been craving without realizing it. Elias handed her a mug of hot tea, something earthy and bitter. "Drink, your body still needs help flushing the rest of the venom." She took it with a nod. "Thanks," she murmured, then added, "for everything." He shrugged, sitting across from her. "You would have done the same." She gave a weak smile. "I'm not sure most people would have carried a stranger through the woods, sucked venom from a wound, and performed an impromptu transfusion in a cabin with no electricity." His lips twitched, his version of a grin. Maybe not most people. They fell into a quiet rhythm. Short conversations, meals of foraged mushrooms and broth, moments of silence that weren't uncomfortable. But Ivy could feel something building, a weight pressing behind her ribs. She had never been one to hide, at least not until the last few weeks. That evening, after Elias set down a bundle of dry kindling near the hearth, Ivy finally spoke. "I wasn't just hiking," she said softly. "I was running." Elias turned, his brow furrowed but not judgmental. "I'm not some lost backpacker or off-grid thrill-seeker. I used to be a trauma surgeon. Dr. Ivy Sinclair, Chief Resident, Chicago General." She stared into the fire. "I was on track to become one of the youngest department heads in the hospital's history." He said nothing, but the way he listened, still, direct, gave her space to continue. 2 months ago I lost a patient. It wasn't my fault, but it didn't matter. The media tore it apart. So did the family. Lawsuits, press conferences, internal review panels. I watched my reputation unravel overnight. Elias walked over, knelt near the fire and added a log. The flames snapped and crackled. I snapped, Ivy said. Packed a bag, bought a one-way ticket to Denver. I told no one. I just wanted to disappear. And I did. She turned to him. Until you found me. Elias met her gaze. Or maybe you found something you didn't know you were looking for. The firelight flickered between them, casting shadows on the cabin walls. Ivy swallowed. You're not going to ask about the scandal? No. Why? Because who you were out there doesn't matter as much as who you are here. He stood, gently. You fought. You survived. That's what I see. She blinked, surprised by the warmth rising in her chest. For so long, she had been seen only as a headline, a liability, a fallen star. But here, in this quiet place, in the eyes of a quiet man, she was just a woman trying to breathe again. And for the first time in a long time, she did. The days stretched like soft fabric, quiet, warm, and unrushed. Ivy was healing, not just her body, but the parts of her spirit that had been torn and trampled. She could walk now, slowly, and even helped Elias collect firewood and herbs around the perimeter of the cabin. They didn't talk much, but when they did, it felt like every word mattered. One crisp morning, as sunlight filtered through the trees in golden shafts, Ivy followed Elias to a small stream nearby. He taught her how to identify yarrow and wild mint, how to read the flow of water to know where to dig for clean drinking sources. She laughed when he slipped on a mossy rock and cursed under his breath, his first full sentence of the day. I didn't think you were capable of swearing, she teased. Only when I lose my footing, he replied dryly. By the time they returned to the cabin, the sky had clouded. Ivy sat on the porch, sipping tea, while Elias tended to a broken chair leg inside. That's when she heard it, a low, distant hum, unfamiliar in the wild quiet. At first, she thought it was her imagination. Then it grew louder, rhythmic, mechanical. She stood, heart beginning to pound. Elias? He came to the door just as the treetops began to stir violently. Ivy turned her eyes skyward and saw it, a black helicopter, sleek and low, slicing through the sky like a warning. No, she whispered, stepping back. Elias's face darkened. Did someone know you were here? I didn't tell anyone. I swear, she said. Then it hit her. There was a trail camera the day I got bitten. I thought it was off. Maybe it wasn't. The helicopter descended into the clearing in front of the cabin, blasting leaves and debris in every direction. Ivy shielded her face as several figures in dark tactical clothing jumped down. One of them, mid-50s, trim, clearly in charge, stepped forward, calling over the noise. Dr. Sinclair, thank God, we've been searching for weeks. She didn't move. Her body was frozen, torn between dread and disbelief. Your father has been coordinating the search. The hospital board, the media. You've made headlines across the country. We need to get you home. Elias stood behind her, silent as stone. The man gestured toward the chopper. Please, we have a statement prepared. The press is expecting you. The board is waiting. Ivy turned, looking up at Elias. His jaw was tight, not angry, just braced. You're leaving, he said simply. Tears pricked her eyes. I didn't want this. I didn't plan to be found. You still have a life back there. I don't know if it's mine anymore. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The officer stepped closer. Ma'am, it's time. Ivy looked from the helicopter to Elias, from the noise and urgency to the quiet she had learned to love. Then she reached for Elias's hand. I'm not ready. His fingers tightened around hers. You have to go, but not because you're running from anything or anyone. Go because you choose to. Her voice trembled. Will you wait for me? He looked at her, truly looked. I don't go many places. You'll know where to find me. Moments later, Ivy was lifted into the helicopter, her heart shattering as she looked out the window. Below, Elias stood in the clearing, still as a tree, the cabin shrinking into the green. Izo. And just like that, the forest was behind her, and the world had caught up. Izo. The helicopter landed on the rooftop helipad of a downtown high-rise in Denver. The moment Ivy stepped out, the noise rushed back in. Camera flashes, urgent voices, the steady buzz of engines and footsteps. She blinked under the fluorescent sky of the city, her senses overwhelmed. The scent of pine still clung to her skin, a quiet rebellion against the sterilized air. She was escorted inside immediately, up corridors of polished glass, into elevators that hummed with importance, and finally through the doors of a penthouse hospital suite. Her father was waiting. Gordon Sinclair, once a titan in healthcare investment, now lay thinner, grayer, in a hospital bed, moved into his office for privacy. His face lit up when he saw her. "Ivy," he whispered, "you're alive." She approached slowly, taking his hand. "I'm here, Dad." "You have no idea what this has done to the family name," he said, voice cracking. "The press went wild. The hospital's board is panicked. Your reputation—" "I know," she said quietly, interrupting him. "And I don't care." He blinked, stunned. "You don't care?" "No. Because for the first time in my life I feel like I can breathe." She stood straighter now, eyes clear. "You built a life for me that I never chose. I played the role. I excelled. But I never asked if it was what I wanted." He tried to speak, but she raised a hand. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to tell you I'm not going back." There were meetings, interviews, and boardrooms after that. Rooms filled with people demanding answers. She gave them calmly. Then, without fanfare, Ivy resigned. She didn't just walk away from the hospital. She walked away from everything tethered to that identity. She sold her condo, liquidated unused trust assets, and with a single press release, she launched something entirely new. A foundation, Stillwater Fund, named not for a place, but for the feeling. It would fund wilderness medicine programs, train rescue volunteers, build satellite clinics in remote areas, and it would invest in land preservation to protect the places like the one that had saved her. The media didn't know what to make of it. One week she was a disgraced surgeon, the next a philanthropist in hiking boots. Nop. She didn't care. Mop. At the press conference, Ivy stood alone on the stage. No handlers, no scripts. "I didn't disappear," she said into the microphones. "I reappeared, to myself." She took a breath. "I was saved in the mountains, not just physically, but spiritually, by a man who lives without fame, without title, and with more purpose than most of us ever find. I won't name him, he wouldn't want that. But I owe him everything." She looked straight into the cameras. "Into Yania. I'm not going back to the operating room. I'm going back to the forest." Then she walked off stage and didn't look back. The bus dropped her off miles from where the forest began. Ivy stepped onto the dirt road with nothing but a backpack, a weathered trail map, and the flannel shirt Elias had once draped over her shoulders. Her hair was longer now, wild from days without city polish, and her boots were worn again, not from running, but from returning. She hadn't contacted him. She hadn't sent a letter, a message, or even asked anyone about him. Some things needed to be done in person, quietly, authentically. She walked for hours, through tall ferns, across rushing brooks, past the leaning pine he once pointed out as their marker. Each familiar shape in the forest felt like a breadcrumb leading her home. And then, just as the golden hour stretched across the treetops, she saw it. Pine, 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 pine tree insaning. Keza standing, smoke trailing from the chimney, a small garden blooming on one side, a new set of wooden stairs. And Elias, standing on the porch with his back to her, packing a bag. Ivy stopped at the edge of the clearing. He didn't hear her at first. His movements were slow, almost ritualistic, folding a shirt, tying a roll of cloth. Then he froze, as if some invisible thread had pulled at him. He turned. Their eyes met. Neither of them moved for several heartbeats. Ivy stepped forward, breath shaky. She didn't say anything. She couldn't. Not at first. She just walked up the steps, dropped her backpack, and wrapped her arms around him. Elias staggered, stunned. Then his arms came around her, firm and safe and home. She buried her face in his chest. "I couldn't stay in that world," she whispered. I thought I had to choose between who I was and who I needed to become. But now I know. I choose this. I choose you." His fingers brushed her hair, and his voice was quiet but full. "I thought I lost you to a place I could never follow." "You didn't," she said. "I just needed to find the courage to come back." He stepped back enough to see her face, studying her with those same clear, steady eyes. "I was about to leave," he admitted. "Couldn't take the silence anymore." She smiled through tears. "Well, you're stuck with me now." He chuckled, something deeper than just amusement, something like relief. Then he opened the cabin door, and Ivy stepped inside, not as a guest, not as a patient, but as someone who belonged. That night, they didn't talk about the world or the future. They just sat by the fire, hands touching, silence blooming around them like warmth. For the first time in both their lives, being here was enough. Spring arrived in quiet bursts, green shoots pushing through thawed earth, birdsong returning to the mornings, and the soft, sweet scent of pine sap warming under sun. Ivy and Elias had settled into something unspoken, a life of shared rhythm and quiet companionship. But healing, Ivy had come to believe, could not stop with them. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sun melt behind the ridges, she turned to Elias and said, "We should build something here. Something for others." He raised an eyebrow. "We already built something. I mean for people who need to find what I found," she said. "What you gave me. A chance to breathe again, to be still, to survive." He didn't reply right away. He sipped his tea, considering. "People don't come out here unless they're already lost." "Exactly," Ivy said. "That's when they need someone most." And so, Stillwater Refuge was born. They started small, clearing space near the cabin, drafting plans on the back of grocery receipts. Elias handled the building. Wood beams, strong foundations, cabins built by hand. Ivy wrote grant proposals, navigated land permits, and tapped into her remaining connections to secure supplies and funding without ever returning to the boardroom. Over months, the refuge took shape. A main lodge with beds and heat. A field clinic stocked with basic medical gear. A teaching hut where Elias began training others in survival medicine, wilderness tracking, and herbal care. A garden that grew wild and useful. Calendula, yarrow, comfrey, mint. Guests began to arrive. Not tourists, but people searching for something deeper. Burnt-out nurses. Veterans. Counselors. Grieving parents. Young doctors teetering on collapse. Each one came carrying something heavy. Each one left a little lighter. Word spread, not through marketing, but stories, like a secret passed between souls who needed it. One afternoon, a woman stood crying in the garden. Ivy approached gently. The woman looked up and whispered, "This place, it feels like the first real breath I've taken in years." Ivy only nodded. She understood. She and Elias worked side by side, chopping wood, teaching first aid, leading quiet walks at dawn. Sometimes, Ivy would find Elias laughing quietly with a group of newcomers around the fire, his eyes softer than she had ever seen them. Sometimes, she would catch him looking at her, and the way his gaze lingered said everything. "Moka alisamatin has I seen a kahbi, and I am kwaya salafai seen hakai salafai seen hakka." They had built something from silence, from pain, from choosing not to run. And it was only the beginning. The refuge settled into a quiet hum of life. Days began with birdsong and ended with firelight. There were no alarms, no meetings, no deadlines, only the rhythm of earth, wind, and the slow, deliberate work of healing. And somewhere in that rhythm, Ivy and Elias fell into love. Not loudly, not with fireworks, but with a quiet certainty that didn't ask for attention. It was there in the way Ivy rested her hand on Elias's back while he taught a group how to splint a fracture using branches and cloth. It was in the way Elias left wildflowers in a mug by her cot after long nights tending to a guest too broken to sleep alone. They never said "I love you." Not yet. They didn't need to. One evening, after the last guest had gone to bed, Ivy and Elias walked the path behind the cabins, just the two of them beneath a sky full of stars. They stopped at a ridge overlooking the Pine Valley. The moon lit the clearing below, like silver, poured onto shadow. "Min, Ivy leaned her head on his shoulder. Do you ever wonder how different our lives would have been if that snake never bit me? No, Elias said, voice calm. Because it did. And now you're here. She smiled softly, fingers grazing his. You make peace feel like something solid, not a theory, not a vacation, just real. He turned toward her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. You made me stop counting the days. I used to live like time was just something to pass. Her breath caught. He stepped closer, forehead resting against hers. Now I wake up wondering what we'll build next. Their kiss was slow, gentle, like the first crack of spring soil after a long frozen winter. No urgency, no doubt, only trust, only time, only love. The days that followed didn't change much, but somehow everything felt different. Ivy laughed more easily now. Elias didn't flinch when others reached out, and every corner of Stillwater carried the imprint of something sacred, presence. In the evenings they'd sit around the fire with guests and volunteers, sipping tea, listening to stories. Ivy's head would often rest on Elias's shoulder, and no one needed to ask if they were together. The answer was in the way their silences fit. They had no wedding, no grand announcement. Their bond was made of earth and wood and breath and choice. And for the first time in their lives, they were no longer surviving. Patronum. They were simply living. Autumn came like a whispered promise, leaves crisping into gold, the air cooler, sharper, tasting faintly of smoke and pine. Stillwater Refuge moved with the seasons, adapting like the forest around it. The garden began to slow. Guests brought sweaters and stories by the fire, and the trails turned quieter as snow threatened the ridge. Ivy stood on the porch one morning, steaming mug in hand, watching the breath curl from her lips. Behind her, the refuge slept. Elias was still inside, probably sharpening tools or organizing tinctures. She smiled at the thought, at how fully this place, and he, had become her home. Later that day, they took their usual hike up the ridge trail. It had become something of a tradition, a way to reflect, to breathe. The path was familiar now. The twisted juniper halfway up, the stone outcropping shaped like a sleeping bear, the tall aspen that always caught the last light. They reached the overlook just as the sun dipped behind the western peaks, painting the valley below in molten gold. Ivy took a deep breath, the kind that stretched into her chest and settled there. This spot, she said quietly, this is where I knew I wouldn't go back. Elias stood beside her, hands in his pockets, silent for a long moment. Then, this is where I started hoping again. She turned to him. Do you think we'll ever leave? Go back to the city? The noise? He looked out at the forest. The endless green, the trails they'd cleared together, the rooftops of the cabins nestled like wooden hearts in the trees. Maybe, he said, but only if we're taking the peace with us. Not because we've lost it here. Ivy nodded, tears stinging her eyes. We're not running anymore. He reached for her hand, their fingers interlacing. We're rooted. And there, standing under a sky painted with fire and dusk, they knew. They had come full circle, not just from pain to healing, but from surviving to choosing. Not just love, but life. And not just for themselves. Stillwater Refuge became more than a retreat. It became a movement. Guests returned year after year, not just to rest, but to give. Former patients became volunteers. Burnt-out professionals became teachers. Broken souls became builders. And when people asked about the story, about how it all began, someone would always smile and say, she was a doctor who almost died in the forest, and he was the stranger who brought her back. But that wasn't the real story. The real story was how they saved each other, without ever meaning to, how two people, both running from ghosts, found something sacred in the quiet. Not a rescue, a return. Sometimes, the wildest places aren't where we get lost. Won't. They're where we're finally found. A fatally fey. And sometimes, love doesn't shout or shine. Fatally, it waits. And when you're ready, it opens the door. If this story moved you, reminded you that healing is real, or renewed your belief in second chances, we invite you to subscribe to Healing Stories. Here, we share real-life journeys of strength, love, and hope. Stories that speak straight to the soul. Thank you for being here. And always remember, no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back to the light. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know.